So we were just chatting off air. Ronnie, do we say off air? I mean, we're pre-recording. We were chatting as we were before you hit the record button.
We'll go with that.
Well, yeah. It's just chatting off with Alan, our guest, who I'll introduce in a moment. And we've not only have special guest as we always do, but I have one dog in the room with me and one dog in the room behind me as we've just got a new puppy. And so we got a lot going on. There's a lot of potential noises today that we're going to fight through, but it's fine. We always make it work because that's what we do, right?
We just keep it going.
Just keep it going.
Just push through.
I mean, look, it's informal. This is a casual conversation. So welcome to Group Thinkers. I'm your host, Justin McCord. With me, as always, is Ronnie Richard, and Group Thinkers is the podcast from RKD Group. On each and every episode, we welcome someone from that's connected. I have to accentuate that as we talk about our guest today, that's connected to the nonprofit space. And we have actually been the one to connect our guest to the nonprofit space today, and that's Alan Cole from Full Stack Economics. Alan, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Hey, we're excited to talk to you. My first question for you is, how does one become an economist? Like, what's the path? Like, how did you find yourself into this space?
There are a few different kind of varieties of economists. Some are in the business, the private sector, working on some sort of microeconomic thing involving particular business, how customers respond to a change in prices, for example, would be a price elasticity. That might be something you'd hire an economist to calculate. There are also ones in private business who work on forecasting, figuring out how much overall demand there will be, how many new jobs there will be. There are some who work in different government spaces on things like public finance. How do you raise tax revenue? And that's kind of where most of my background is, but I also dabble in things like monetary policy. And for that kind of job, you're kind of sometimes in government, sometimes in think tanks, and that's mostly my background. I come most recently from the Joint Economic Committee, which is a kind of Congress's own miniature think tank, and then I've been at think tanks prior to that.
Well, we're thrilled to know you and thrilled to be able to chat with you today. We have been in the midst of a series on the supply chain as it impacts the nonprofit marketing space, right? And so this is somewhat new territory for nonprofit marketers, but we're in an extended season of new territory, as it were, over the last 20 going on 24 months now of the pandemic and its impact on us. And so really what we want to talk about today, Alan, with you is understand at a broader scale talk about this about the supply chain and relate it back to what we're seeing in the nonprofit marketing space. And so thanks again for being here. Just our listeners, so that they know, Alan and his wife just recently welcomed a new little one. So he is in the fog of war of fatherhood, and so he's taking time away today with a little one that's 17 days old to join us, and we're really thrilled. So supply chain. And I did not enter 2021 thinking I was going to use that phrase at all, much less as much as I have. So can you give us a little background and insight into your perspective on not only where we are now, but when did you first begin noticing a problem with the supply chain?
there are two kinds of problems that are going on with businesses struggling to meet customer demand. The first is that customers just have a lot of money right now. And the second is that they're demanding different things than they did back in 2019. And both of these are challenging for businesses to meet. And especially challenging because it's very different from the last recession. And I and a lot of other people, I think, were expecting more of a sort of recovery from the last recession, which people did not have a lot of money to spend on consumer goods. Firms only slowly ramped up over a very long period of time. It took 10 years to recover. But we're doing something different now, and part of that is COVID-19, and part of that is policy circumstances. COVID-19 obviously caused a lot of things to be shut down. That was kind of the genesis of the recession, and we thought perhaps it was going away as of early 2021. We had the vaccines rolling out. Things were generally kind of looking up. And that brought back a whole rush of demand, not only because people were ready to spend again, but also because a lot of them had saved money during the pandemic. Even the people who had lost their jobs during the pandemic were often supported through either the Paycheck Protection Program or pandemic unemployment insurance. And in all of those cases, money was more plentiful in the aggregate for people. Maybe some people were worse off financially, but overall the fiscal support was huge from 3 consecutive support packages for people. So people have a ton of money and they're ready to spend it again. Maybe we haven't recovered from COVID-19 as much as would like, but nonetheless, I think a lot of people are looking for a return to normal. But there's a caveat to normal. People are spending more, but the composition of their spending has changed. They're looking more for goods they can enjoy at home. They're looking for more for physical stuff that they can bring home with them, and much less for services, things where you go out, where you see people out in the world. And that probably reflects somewhat the fact that we're not entirely done with this. Perhaps some activities are still canceled and others aren't really the same or aren't as fun as they were before because of the precautions you have to take.
And this is really a consumer insight that you're speaking to, of looking for goods, right? Looking for those things that we can enjoy. That's a consumer insight, not necessarily a business insight, because the consumer insight drives how the business responds to it.
Right, right. So businesses are kind of hit with this triple whammy of maybe they thought that the recovery was going to be slow and they didn't work that hard to retain staff going into 2021, so they have to ramp up quickly. They also were geared for a different demand mix in 2019 than they ended up having in 2021. And finally, customers just have a lot of money. They're spending a lot. Actually, they're spending more than as if this whole thing never happened. And I think a lot of economists predicted they would spend less, but because of the generous fiscal support, they've been able to spend more. So firms are kind of straining on 3 different fronts right now.
So, when we talk about economics, we often talk about supply and demand, and you just illustrated it very well there. Supply is struggling to keep up with demand. In your mind, like, what is exactly taking so long for the supply to catch up to the increased demand that consumers are showing? Is it just this long tail aspect we're looking at, that it just cannot move fast? I mean, like, just why are we in this spot where it's taking so long to catch up?
I would say this actually isn't very long with respect to how the economy usually undergoes changes or usually deals with changes in the composition of demand. For example, if you think about a classic change in the economy, say the shift over from rental video to streaming services, there was a good 7 years in there, and that was just one sector of the economy, and you know, Netflix hit on the idea early, Hulu a little bit early, Disney kind of in the middle, and then Paramount Plus and other and Peacock TV came kind of on the
Everything
tail
that I
end
have
of
a
that.
subscription to, you're naming every app that is on my TV. You're
Yeah.
going one by one through each of them.
But there was kind of a reasonably long adjustment period, and obviously that was kind of one of the most disrupted sectors of the economy. And you know, that's just one. And here what we had is everything got disrupted at once. There are tons of industries that are changing things or undergoing something completely different, um, or there are tons of industries that have still contracted and others that need to expand, and all of it's happening at once, and all of it's happening over, you know, only a couple of years. And um, there are reasons that you can't just look at the economy like unallocated labor can kind of go anywhere and build anything. It actually takes time for you to adjust from one style of demand to another. And I think this is further complicated by the fact that perhaps at least for a while, certainly as of March 2020, maybe even as of December 2020, we thought at some point everything's going to go back to exactly as normal. So there's perhaps no point in changing. There's no point in changing how we produce things because in not too long, maybe 2021 or 2022 will look more or less like 2019. So some of the workers and firms that are sitting idle right now, rather than re-employing themselves into the sectors with high demand, they should just sit tight and wait for this all to be over. But as this all drags on, I think it's time to reevaluate that sum, at least for some of the firms that are hardest hit, and for some of the sectors that need the most help right now, some reallocation of resources may be worth it.
One of the areas where the nonprofit industry itself has been hit more than others. I mean, there's a couple. There's certainly an economy to the volunteer space. And so the demand for volunteers has remained high, but because of the pandemic and health precautions from, you know, city to city, state to state, and organization to organization, there's been this incredibly high demand, but then a low volume of volunteers. And so that's caused nonprofits to many times adjust the way that they address their own workloads, right? Because they rely on volunteers to accomplish certain tasks on their behalf. And so that's a real life example. Another way, you know, we work with food banks, and so the cost of goods increasing, particularly with food. And, you know, for food banks that rely on not just donated goods, but also rely on the ability to secure food and supplies to distribute to those who are in the most need. Now all of a sudden their dollar is not going as far, and so that's another area where nonprofits have been impacted by this. And then the third, that from a marketer standpoint, is the raw materials, both from paper goods and adhesives, to be able to produce marketing messages that are sent through the mail. And so there's an increase in costs, but then there's also there has been a significant shortage of supply of those paper goods. And as I understand it, some of that, it backs into exactly what you're saying, is that at one point in 2020, there were manufacturers that not only were they short-staffed, but they were shifting to more production of cardboard to assist with the increase in demand for businesses like Amazon, who are shipping at astronomical rates versus producing the other paper goods like envelopes, etc. And so it's really interesting the way that this all kind of collides and creates a tough space for a nonprofit marketer. How long should we expect this to last?
I think as long as COVID-19 is going on, you're going to have problems like this. And there's some interesting stories on both on several of the things that you mentioned. But over time, the longer it lasts, the more firms are going to adjust in some way or another. And often it takes them time to research how to do it, or it takes them a little bit of time to figure out how to have 17 people working on a floor that previously had 14 people working. But eventually they will do it because the prices are a signal to them that they need to be doing that, and also a reward to them for doing so. Interesting that you mentioned that you have a harder time finding volunteers than you used to. Certainly private sector, ordinary businesses that pay ordinary salaries for the for-profit world, they're also having a hard time, and they've even increased wages a bunch. And from their perspective, it's kind of like, why aren't the workers showing up? There are still a lot of people out of work right now, relative to how many people were working in 2019, and they're being offered more money and they're still not showing. And I think that shows that there's something that economists might call non-wage amenities or compensating differentials. And that's basically like a fancy word for things that you might like or dislike about your job other than the money. And for volunteer work for a nonprofit, that's everything. You do it because it's rewarding and you want to do a good thing. But you can imagine that probably a lot of volunteer work has become more difficult or less pleasant in some way because of the virus. And also the issue of paper products that you mentioned, that's a really interesting one because economists have a large organization within the federal government called the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it tracks all sorts of things pertaining to what people are working in and for how much. And obviously, employment in most sectors is kind of down from the 2019 levels. But one area where it's up substantially is shipping and warehousing. There's lots of people moving boxes around, more than before, because more people are taking deliveries for stuff. But that is definitely putting a crunch on timber products. And there's another maybe demand side crunch happening there, in that there's also a lot more demand for housing because people want to spend more time at home, and so they want larger houses. And that also puts demand for that kind of same timber. So people were looking at that a lot during the spring and summer of 2021, and that's abated some, but it's definitely been a problem.
Alan, you kind of mentioned that the economy just kind of has this way of rebalancing itself over time. Have we encountered anything like this before, where just this massive shock to the system and how long it takes to rebalance, or are there like some built-in things to the economy that we've seen before where something has just kind of rebalanced itself naturally, or maybe labor has shifted in a seasonally or something like that? Like, I'm just trying to wrap my brain around how this plays out.
I think the only suitable comparison is essentially 1945, 1946. It's that scale. It's like the same scale in terms of reallocating stuff in the economy as sort of the last winding down of World War II. Obviously, World War II trumps it, but if you look, over the next 75 years after that, changes in the economy were relatively modest compared to World War II and COVID-19. And those are the things that required the greatest remobilization of resources and changes in how we live. So a lot of economic statistics look really weird in 1946. A lot of them look really weird in 2020 and 21. And then there's kind of this huge period of moderation that lasted, some people's whole lifetimes. But we're living through a weird period right now, and I think we should just kind of let the price signals show what they're showing and understand that it might not be possible to do anything about them immediately. But over time, people are incentivized to change their production, change what they do in order to fit the new reality, however long that may be.
Yeah, I think changing the production or changing what you do, that hits right at home for us as marketers, right? Because Alan, one of the ways that we're addressing this is by thinking through ways to stay in connection with your end target. For us, it's donors, like thinking of how to keep relationship with them. And so whether or not that's through an analog traditional means like direct mail, or if it's through a combination of other channels by mobile and by digital and by other ways of connecting with them, basically thinking about how to in some ways re-engineer a path to getting to your same target. And in other ways, it's not necessarily re-engineering a path, but maybe it's simplifying a path of the way in which we're using products that are higher in demand right now to bridge that connection. So what you just said really hits home, because that's the space that we find ourselves as marketers right now, is trying to navigate these unprecedented moments and then stay focused on our target, which is building connections between donors and nonprofits.
Right. The digital infrastructure has really held up and been robust to all of the problems we've had in a way that a lot of the physical infrastructure hasn't. And to some extent, you want to change how you use your workforce and have them essentially online a little bit more, as we are right now, and offline a little bit less. And obviously, there are some things that we're going to miss, but there were also kind of some trends of people getting more and more online. I know I certainly interact with the charities that I donate to, mostly online. And I think that that trend was already there and probably is accelerating a bit. And I'm sure you're seeing that in the data.
That's exactly right. And we use those words, the acceleration. There's an acceleration here of many different things that have happened. I don't think that we considered that the acceleration of not only digital, but honestly, the acceleration of charitable support from people that had never supported before was a tremendous blessing over the course of 2020. And so, you're in the midst of, you're seeing a boom for many organizations of new donors that are acquired. And so you're working hard to build loyalty with those people through all of your marketing means. And so, it's not that you're caught off guard, but you're not anticipating that in the midst of this, that there's going to be shifts in the economy as such as to create supply chain issues and then, drive you towards further evolving how you think. So, what would you, as our resident expert and economist, from your seat, what would you advise, a nonprofit organization or be it a for-profit organization, someone who finds themselves caught in the storm right now around the supply chain? What would you advise them to do in the next few months? How should they respond?
I don't think this is a scenario that perhaps the more conspiratorial minded people you might know will talk about, where hyperinflation starts, the dollar loses all of its value. You don't have to worry about that. You can stay in financial assets, you can stay in liquid stuff, but you want to wait for some of the deflationary forces to kick in. You want to wait for firms in your suppliers' industries to figure out how to produce stuff more efficiently or produce stuff more and deal with the higher demand. Because here's kind of the central problem that you're facing right now. Yes, you have more money, you have more donors, you're doing well, but so is everyone else, and that comes from the unprecedented fiscal support. That's what makes this so different from the last recession. People in the Biden administration kind of looked back on how things went during the Obama administration, and they said the key is getting more money out to people, and that would have allowed the 2010s recovery to go much faster. And so they've done that, and they got a lot of money out to people, but it sort of means everyone has a lot of money at the same time. And obviously that is spurring a lot of job growth. We're getting much faster job growth than before. Obviously that's good for your balance sheet, but it means it's a little harder to get value for your money. And certainly if you're asking for a premium product and you're asking for it right now, you might be in a pretty tough bidding war. So I think this is definitely the time to bargain hunt and definitely the time to be patient.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on the patience side. I think that there's an element to this that is thinking further in advance. And so while we can look at the trends, as you have pointed out, and think about where there may be some balance in sight, it still makes sense to plan further in advance, be patient, be empathetic, and know that we're all walking through it together. And like you said, the events over the last now 2 years, those have propelled us to a new space. So even as we use words like recover, we're not going back to 2019. I don't think that we will see a reverse course on how we have become even more digitally savvy and digitally aware. I don't think that we'll see a reverse course on lots of elements like that. So I think that it's also about understanding what that patience looks like and where we can still divert our marketing dollars to stay relevant with our target audiences. Alan, we really appreciate your perspective. If someone were interested in the work that you do at Full Stack, where would they go? How would they get in touch with you? How do they learn more about all the areas that you and your team are putting into your newsletter?
The website is fullstackeconomics.com, all one word. You can also Google it, and I write there with Timothy Lee, and you can get it as a subscription newsletter straight to your inbox.
Very cool. And we would encourage everyone to do so. Support the work of Alan and Timothy. And Alan, we appreciate you being on the show. Appreciate you offering your perspective. And Ronnie, we're glad to have an economist in our virtual Rolodex now.
Absolutely.
You never know when that's going to come in handy.
I love economics. It's a secret passion of mine. So this is probably my favorite episode.
I don't know how to respond to that. I feel like I want to say, Alan, he says that to everyone. He says that to everyone that's on, but he doesn't. So no, it's fascinating stuff. We really are very appreciative of you sharing your perspectives and your knowledge to help us continue to contextualize what's happening in our space into the larger scale. So Alan, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime.
All right, well, that's it for this episode. All the episodes of Group Thinkers are available on the RKD Group website. You can also check out our other resources there. Just get on over to rkdgroup.com and Yeah, that's it. Well, Ronnie, we got a few more episodes around the supply chain to come, and so excited to continue this series. So we'll see you all next time.